Hi everyone, welcome to Full Catalog. Before I get into it, everything in this review is my opinion. If you disagree, you can let me know, but do so respectfully, because I've been a bit nervous to do this one. Not because it is my least favorite album by The Killers, but because I actually don't really care for it at all. If you put this album in front of me, having never heard The Killers before, I would not continue on to listen to more of their work. To me, Battleborn feels like it does a worse job of things that they did on previous albums, or even on the other end, introduced new ideas that were done so much better on later albums, specifically Imploding the Mirage. I think it lacks identity a bit, suffers from poor pacing, and in general just isn't very memorable. I will also say that the overall album aesthetic is something that matters to me with music. What feelings do the song titles evoke? What about the album art? I'll get into it, but I don't love the aesthetic of Battleborn at all. This is by far their worst album cover and tracklist titles, in my opinion, and I really try not to weigh that too heavily, but I have to be honest about my opinions, right? Like the music is first and foremost, but I think these things all kind of add into the overall experience and cohesion of an album. And this is the one Killers album that not only am I not too fond of the music, I'm not into the overall aesthetic either or themes. All that said, if you are new here, I don't usually spoil that much of the review ahead of time, but I just want to give a bit of a warning. I don't really love this. I've been very positive about my previous album reviews of the Killers. Um, but the format is I review albums going track by track in chronological order, and then I share my thoughts on them, followed by kind of my overall rating and closing thoughts. I rate albums on a 5 point scale, which is displayed on screen now, so you can understand what each of the ratings means. Without further ado, Flesh and Bone. This is actually a very strong opening track. I love that main synth melody in the chorus, and the highlight of the track for me ends up being the second verse, especially the drop of the album title. I've always loved that moment. If the rest of the album kept up the momentum and quality of this track, it would be much stronger overall. Runaways has always been one of those songs that I find to be slightly overrated. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the song, but I don't seek it out really and replay it often. It just feels very safe, which I think is my main complaint with much of the track list here. And that's an argument I carry directly into track 3, The Way It Was. It just feels a bit generic to me compared to things that I know this band is capable of. I think the production on this album might be part of that feeling for me. Another problem I have always had, connecting with this album, and this might be a personal thing, but I find that the song titles themselves are pretty unmemorable, which causes a problem for me where I can't just look at the titles and hear the song in my head. There's a few exceptions to that, but like in general, The Way It Was, Runaways, these are pretty generic feeling song titles. As opposed to something like My Own Soul's Warning. It just like you just look at it for the first time and you're like, wow, I'm interested in that, you know? Um, and kind of continuing the streak of generic song titles is Here With Me. I always have to turn this track on for a few seconds before I remember which song it is. I find that this track overstays its welcome quite badly. It's a good enough song for the first couple minutes, but it just drags on without doing anything particularly dynamic or interesting to justify that runtime. Getting into A Matter of Time, this song has a solid synth intro, like Flesh and Bone. I do think this intro is exactly what I had in mind when I said I wish the album kept up the energy and sound of that opening track. I find parts of this track to sound a bit too similar to Runaways, actually, and it's part of my complaint is that this album just kind of lacks standout or unique moments to me in ways that their past or later albums have contained. Now, getting to probably one of my least favorite Killers songs, Deadlines and Commitments. This track has an interesting enough atmosphere compared to the preceding tracks, And I like the falsetto notes in the verses and the synth in the second verse. It's another track that just feels so slow to me and not interesting enough for its runtime, which is a problem with many of the tracks here. I do find it ironic that the album art featuring a speeding car and a horse just feels so slow throughout. It's not all bad though, because Miss Atomic Bomb has such an infectious synth melody, and in general sounds like it could have been a solid fit in the track list of Day and Age. I like the dynamic build of this track, and think it is something sorely lacking throughout Battleborn. So many of the tracks feel overlong because of how little they do in terms of dynamics and build, and this is the first track since Flesh and Bone that I genuinely enjoy and go out of my way to listen to. Miss Atomic Bomb is a great song. The Rising Tide is another very forgettable track in the Killers catalog for me. I actually forgot it existed when doing my listens of Battleborn to write this review. The song is a skip for me. I think the lyrics are very weak, and musically, this song just feels like a bit of an unfocused mess. Instrumentally and vocally, it feels like splatter paint almost. And The Heart of a Girl is another song where the atmosphere musically in the track is interesting, and I like it a bit, but it loses me when it gets to the chorus, which is one of my least favorites in their catalog. Something about the delivery of daddy, 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 and baby, baby, babe is just off to me. I just can't get into this song. I'm sorry. But From Here On Out brings much needed energy back into this album, though it is a bit futile being wedged in between Heart of a Girl and Be Still. The tracklist ordering of this album is just bad, in my opinion. There seems to have been little to no thought given to the pacing or complete whiplash in vibes. I suspect that for many people, this is an album where you're going to go through and pick certain songs to listen to rather than spinning it in order front to back, right? That's how it is for me, at least. It was a negative experience for me doing this review, listening to this album multiple times in order because of this track placement and what it does to the pacing. It just doesn't feel intentional in the way that all of their other albums do, where you've got this kind of flow between songs that feels natural and feels thought out. Here it feels like they took the radio singles they knew were going to be popular for this song, and for the most part crammed them all into the first half of the album, and then it's just like B-sides for the entire rest of it is how it feels. But getting into Be Still, it's a solid enough ballad and another atmospheric track with decent dynamics and build, which I said was missing from most of the album. The instrumentation is very well done, and the Labor Till the Work is Done melody is memorable. I love the acoustic strums that close out the song, and the way it fades out. Getting into the closing track and titular track, Battleborn, this is such an incredible closer. Where was this for the rest of the album? Seriously, it's like they put all of their effort into the opener, midway point, and closer. I mean, Flesh and Bone and Battleborn are such fantastic bookends, but most of what is in between is just forgettable. The buildup of this track, the chorus, it's a perfect song. One of the best closers in a catalog full of incredible ones. It makes it all the more frustrating for me that this album is so weak because there are clear moments and ideas of greatness scattered around, but too few and far between. To close out, if Battleborn works for you, I'm glad, and honestly a bit jealous, but I have to be honest about my opinion and my tastes as someone who's going through and reviewing albums. This is by far my least favorite by The Killers, being the only one that I don't even have downloaded on my streaming service or own a physical copy of. I unfortunately have to give Battleborn a 2 out of 5 because I end up skipping most of the tracks. There are some really great songs here, like Flesh and Bone, Miss Atomic Bomb, and Battleborn, but the rest I could and do live without. Sorry that this one was a bit more negative, but again, have to be honest about my opinion here. Thank you for watching. I recommend you to check out my previous 3 reviews of The Killers for a much more positive sentiment. I adore this band, but I can't think of very many artists without a miss or two in their catalog. Next week, We'll be back to the more positive vibes as I review Day and Age. Thank you.